Many towns in the northern part of the United States are plagued by dark turn of events, such as these 5 cold cases you're about to hear now. Rita Hester was a wonderful woman who inspired Transgender Day of Remembrance. She grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and was the youngest of 5 children. Her family was very supportive of her decision. However, the world wasn't, and it led to her tragic death. But if we want to understand what happened to her, we must start at the beginning. Typically, Rita would return home to Connecticut to spend Thanksgiving with her family. However, in 1998, she decided to stay in Boston. Rita was known to frequent different clubs in her area where she would perform as a singer. Earlier in the day of November 28th, Rita went to her friend, Brenda Wayne's, home to watch ice skating on TV. Later that evening, she got a call from a friend to grab a drink at one of Rita's favorite local bars, Silhouette's. They made plans to meet up at 7 p.m. However, Rita never made it to Silhouette's. Sometime that evening, on November 28, 1998, Rita was murdered. One of Rita's neighbors called 911 about a domestic fight inside her apartment. When the police did arrive, Rita was barely hanging on to life. This was a result of 20 stab wounds to her chest. Her neighbor recalls that it took a long time for the police to get inside her apartment, even though the back door was open. Unfortunately, law enforcement waited more than an hour before bringing her to the hospital, where she would later die from cardiac arrest, 2 days before her 35th birthday. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry or missing items. The police focused on her last hours and the lot behind the apartment building where Rita lived, but ultimately, no leads were found. She was also misgendered in the news outlets, causing more outrage. Her case is still unsolved, but her story lives on. Tiesha Sargeant is described by family and friends as a lovely, brilliant, and determined overachiever. Tiesha was also described as a superstar student. She was the co-head of the student government and the junior prom princess. She truly did it all. So how could such a bright person have the most grimmest fate? Tiesha had begun dating Keith Huggins, and the two moved in together. Although her friends saw the red flags, they couldn't change Tiesha's mind, even after he put her in danger. Keith had been selling drugs in their apartment and had large sums of cash and guns left out. At around 1:30 a.m. on May 4th, 2006, Keith called the police to report they had been robbed. But that wasn't the worst part. The intruders bound Tiesha and Keith together and throw a sheet over Tiesha's head. Once the intruders took $5,000 in cash and Keith's cell phone, they shoot Tiesha in the head, killing her. Keith admits to the police that he had a drug deal that occurred before Tiesha's murder. He is then arrested for drug possession, but he's bailed out shortly after. Police also found a gun around the apartment building, but were unable to prove that the gun came from one of the robbers. Police then asked Keith to take a lie detector test, and at first, he agrees, but he quickly changes his mind and refused to cooperate. Tiesha's case soon lost media coverage once the news of the drug deals came out, and without Keith's cooperation, Tiesha's case goes cold quickly and still remains unsolved to this day. Tonya Harvey was known by her close friends as a faithful Christian and a bold and talented singer who had an incredible stage presence. Unfortunately, her life was tragically cut short, making her the 4th transgender woman killed in 2018. But to understand how this tragedy unfolded, we must start at the beginning. Shortly before 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, February 6, 2018, Tonya was shot dead on a dead-end street, Shepherd Street, in Buffalo. She was shot 6 times in the neck, head, buttocks, groin, and back by an assailant. The Erie County District Attorney Office released a statement about Tonya's murder. They are extremely concerned about the spike of homicides of transgender people across the country. They also believe that this could be a potential hate crime. Now, 6 years later, after Tonya's tragic death, media attention dwindles significantly, and no new leads have been reported by the Buffalo Police Department. The police also didn't declare Tonya's death officially a hate crime, causing more outrage in the LGBT community. Tonya's killer has never been apprehended, and her case remains unsolved, but never forgotten in her Buffalo town. Diana Ferris was a mother of 3 and was 5.5 months pregnant when her life tragically ended. But in order to understand how this occurred, we must start at the beginning. Diana's friends and family grew concerned when they hadn't heard from her in a few days. A wellness check was performed by a maintenance worker, and on April 11, 1996, her body was found. Diana was found on the 2nd floor of her apartment in bed. She was wearing a t-shirt, underwear, and a pillowcase over her head. Police also found a telephone cord wrapped around her neck, as well as bruises on her leg. When authorities arrived on the scene, she was pronounced dead and her fetus was stillborn. Some reports suggest that she was dead for several days. An autopsy was conducted the next day, and her death was ruled as a homicide. At one point, investigators believed it was a connection to other cases, but it's not known if it really was. But unfortunately, her case is still unsolved, and most of her investigation is not known to the public. Kimberly Morse was an exotic dancer that worked at the Foxy Lady Gentlemen's Club. Unfortunately, she would be murdered in her own home by an unknown assailant. But in order to understand how this happened, we must start from the beginning. Kimberly left work once her shift ended and returned to her apartment in North Providence, Rhode Island, between 1:40 a.m. and 1:50 a.m. What happened next has been pieced together by investigators over the past 24 years. Kimberly noticed that her apartment door was open before entering. Investigators then believe that once she stepped into the apartment and sat down her keys and gloves, she was attacked from behind and instantly killed. However, Kimberly's body wouldn't be found until 5 p.m. that evening, when neighbors reported smoke coming from her apartment. When the firefighters entered the apartment, they found Kimberly's body in the bathtub, engulfed in flames. And in addition to the already horrific scene, there was blood everywhere, covering the walls and the floors. And the scariest part is that the police believe that Kimberly knew her assailant. It's crazy to even know someone with the level of this brutality. But as you know, her killer is still out there. And after 24 years, her case is still unsolved.